Hello everyone's Forest Focus. As Nottingham Forest take what should be a big step forward in the development of the City Ground and a big step back when it comes from their transfer targets. Here with me to discuss all that and more, it's great to welcome back the voice of Nottingham Forest, BBC Radio Nottingham's Forest commentator Colin Fray. Colin, morning, how are you?
Morning, yeah, very well, thanks, Matt. Hope everybody's okay.
Yes. I hope everyone is well. It's a lovely sunny day. Some good news last night around the City Ground, which we should probably kick off with. The planning hearing went as planned. I didn't watch it all. It sounded pretty boring, but very long. But Forest got what they wanted. They got permission to redevelop the Peter Taylor stand, increase capacity by 5,000, and add lots of corporate facilities and really enhance the ground. I think with apartments in the long term and lots of big future plans. But initially, Colin, this feels like a big positive step forwards for what's been a very long process.
Yeah, it has been a long process. I can't help but feel a little bit of deja vu because, we were sort of here and having the same sort of discussions 3 years ago when they initially got their planning permission. And of course, we know it's been a very long saga since. But important, I think, obviously another important step now with the revised plans, the slightly changed plans. I don't think there was much new in it, but the important uncoupling, I think, of the stand development with the potential apartments development has been part of this kind of new application, if you like. So, but whatever the minutiae of planning details and stuff that's way outside of our remit, it seems good news for Forest that they've now got the go ahead, that they're able to develop the stand, to knock the old stand down. That said, I haven't yet had time to sort of catch up with any of the small print. I know that there were a lot of caveats on the last planning permission, which is why things never really got started from the permission that was given 3 years ago, because there were a lot of stipulations and conditions that had to be met that haven't yet been met. So I suspect it's probably similar this time, but as I say, I haven't had a chance to kind of fully digest it yet. That's why I say I'm sort of got a bit of a sense of deja vu that we're talking about getting planning permission to rebuild the Peter Taylor stand, which these plans were originally put out 6 years ago, something like that. So it's taken a long time to get to this stage. We'll wait and see exactly how long it takes to actually get some shovels in the ground.
Yeah, I think the boat club, like you, I haven't read everything. There's huge amounts of detail in it around Section 106 agreements and all that stuff. But the boat club feels like something that hopefully can be resolved, the moving of that, and then they can kick on.
Yeah.
When we look at the bigger picture around the ground and the Premier League, and we talk to death about PSR and all that stuff. I'm sure you guys have done it on your podcast. Does it feel like without this ground development, it's going to be very difficult for Forest to consistently compete with the level of football clubs that we're trying to go toe to toe with these days?
Yeah, I think you have to be realistic about that. Last season was an incredible effort from everybody to compete with the behemoths of the Premier League, that some of the behemoths of world football, never mind just the Premier League. And so from a position where Forest were, to have been able to compete throughout the whole season with those guys was an incredible effort. And it's probably going to take an even bigger effort to try and do the same again. So anything they can do to help, and again, we're talking here in the future at some point. This isn't going to be an immediate thing, is it? But anything they can do to help themselves in the future by increasing the amount of income that comes into the club, and therefore the amount of spending power that the club has, then they have to give themselves every opportunity to do that. And obviously this is part of the jigsaw, as you mentioned, the hospitality, the making of a stand which has rooms and areas which can accommodate hospitality stuff 7 days a week. Not just in terms of on the day at football, which is obviously when it's going to be its busiest, but that kind of thing. You look at some of the grounds that are around the Premier League, and then with all due respect to it, and we all love the place, don't we? You look at the City Ground, and it clearly is lacking in some departments, in some areas. It has its charm, of course it does, but there is certainly room for keeping that charm, but also enhancing the commercial opportunities within it. And at the moment, I think Forest are and have been for several years, pretty much behind the 8 ball compared to a lot of Premier League clubs. I wouldn't say all, but compared to a lot, and certainly they're miles behind the kind of facilities that you see. To use that word again, some of those behemoths that they were challenging on the pitch last season. And a new stand is going to take a step towards that, but it's not going to close the gap completely. Forest are years and years and years behind, and that's obvious, isn't it? Because for 25 years they were out of the big time.
Yeah, and as we said, it feels like this is part of a bigger process around the Bridgeford end and other stuff as well. Just one other question on this: will you and I don't know who your tallest co-com is? Will they enjoy a bit more leg room in the new Peter Taylor stand in the commentary position?
Well, I mean, I hope so. We'll see. I mean, a bit of luxury seating, carpeting, bit of heating might be nice. We are at the at the planning stage. So at this stage, Matt, I think what I'd say is anything's possible.
Representations will be made.
A chat about facilities, I'm here for you.
Exactly. Let's move on away from that then. That's good news. I guess this is bad news. I don't know too much about the player. Obviously, Tim Weah from Juventus. We spoke about him with Adam Summerton, who had a good summary of him as a good squad option, not necessarily a good starting option. Lots of reports, and his agent have basically said that he's not coming to Forest. He wants to stay at Juve. I don't know if you had formed much thoughts about this one, Colin. Is it just one that we'll forget about him in 3 months? We'll have signed someone else, but you just move on and look for the next target.
I think that's what you have to do. If this is the case, and we're going to see this right up to the end of the transfer window, and we see it, now that since Forest have been back in the Premier League more than most. How many names are linked with a football club over the course of the transfer window? And sometimes it runs into the dozens, sometimes it runs into the hundreds, doesn't it? You see so many links with players, and yeah, I mean, if there was interest in Weah, which it seems there was, and if Weah has now changed his mind, then you move on to the next name on the list, don't you? I mean, that's it, really. I mean, you might. As has been the case with some players in the past, you might, if you're really keen and you think that they're really going to help you, probably at starting level rather than at squad level, then I guess that's when you might go back in with improved offers and all the rest of it. Elanga. Then that's a kind of different thing. But if there are a number of players, I'm sure, that you might make inquiries about. And you get a knockback, and you just say, right, okay, let's move on. Then you go on to the next one. You know what I mean? There are certain levels of players who you are more keen to get than others, and depending, I guess, how high up Nuno's list and the recruiting staff's list those players are, depends how hard you're going to try to actually get them. So it'll be interesting now with all of this stuff coming out overnight from Weah's camp that he wants to stay at Juve. Are Forest that keen on him that they're going to go back in and try and persuade him again? Or, as you say, do they just move on? I suspect probably the latter.
Yeah, I think they'll move on. I mean, it sounded like he wanted a good wedge anyway in his wage packet. There's only so much money to go around. If the guy's not going to be a starter, then I think we'll move on. Samuel Bangula, the other player from Juventus, sounds like he might be wobbling, but we don't know. It's all loads of conjecture and stuff at this time. Yeah. And again, he's a good prospect, but probably move on. Closer to home, and one that's much more concrete stuff we can talk about, is the Anthony Elanga. I was going to say saga. It's not a saga yet. Maybe a third bid is the saga. But what's your take on where we're at with him and how this might play out, do you think?
Well, I think if you'd asked a lot of people at the end of the season, start of the summer, if they felt Forest were going to make a big sale, who might it be? They'd all have said Morgan Gibbs-White and Manchester City. But obviously, it seems, especially given the interest that there was in the winter transfer window as well in January from Newcastle in Elanga. I mean, they are. Go back to a previous answer about lists and how keen you are to get a player in. It would seem, looking from the outside in, that Newcastle are extremely keen to get Anthony Elanga in. And you know, I wouldn't want to see him go. I think he's been outstanding for Forest. I think, you know, you look at the improvement in him as a player since he arrived from Manchester United. You look at his output. Yes, he went through a little bit of a dip really earlier in the season, and Nuno stood by him and said in constant press conferences, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. And then he comes back and he scores in 3 games in a row or something like that, and gets his assist tallies going as well. So I think he's an excellent player. He's a good guy to have around as well. I love talking to him whenever we get the chance to chat with Anthony. So I'd love to see him stay. Having said all that, you know, if you've got a club who is really, really pushing and is going to offer you the kind of money, you know, I hate to use the phrase every player has a price, but, you know, there is that kind of thing in it. And when, you know, when Forest are looking to probably this season, yes, add quality to their squad if they can, but also add depth to their squad. If there's a big offer going to come in from a team that's desperate to have him, and, you know, and you can, as Forest seem to be doing, withstand a couple of the first offers. You know, they don't want to sell him. They're not desperate to sell him. They don't need to sell him. But if you can keep saying no, and the club that really wants him does keep pushing and keeps coming back with an improved offer, then in the end, you kind of think, well, if they're going to get 60 million, then you can bring in 3 20 million pound players. You can bring in 4 15 million pound you know, Milenkovic or Murillo's or whatever they might be at that sort of level of price. And then you're adding both quality and depth. So yes, you're losing quality, undoubted quality in Elanga, but you have the wherewithal then to go out and add quality if your recruitment team can do it again and find those kind of 15 million pound bargains at Premier League level, but also a bit of depth as well. So I think it's a question of Forest are not needing to sell, Forest are not wanting to sell, Newcastle are pushing and do seem very keen to buy. There was this talk yesterday, wasn't there, that he was one of the 3-pronged, what was it, 150 million quid that they were looking to spend to get ready for the Champions League. If they're that desperate, then they'll keep coming back with better offers. And that will be in Forest thoughts, I'm sure. What you don't want to do, you mentioned the word saga earlier, and you know what you don't want it to do is to become a saga. You don't want it to become this kind of thing where Forest hang on for so long and they end up with, I don't know, maybe forcing Newcastle in the last week before deadline day to part with, say, 70, 75 million or something like that. You know, you've really driven the price up because you've made Newcastle get desperate because it's right at the end of the window. Then, of course, you've got no time to spend it. Then you've got no time to add your depth. So you don't want it really to be running on and on and on and becoming a saga. But certainly it's going to be an interesting one to watch over the next couple of weeks or so. I'm fairly sure that you know, Forest, they won't want to sell, but if it's going to happen, they'll want it to happen fairly soon, so that then they know where they are in terms of adding, as I say, that those extra numbers, I suppose, that depth.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's João Pedro, James Trafford, and Elanga. I think it was 125 million or something like that. I can see why. I mean, you can see why Newcastle want him. To be fair, I wouldn't hold it against him if he went, because he's going to get Champions League football. Their right winger Murphy had a great season, but he's 30, and he's going to be the starting winger in a Champions League team if he goes. So, yeah, it'll be interesting how it plays out. My gut is that he might well move on. I'll ask Colin about if he moves on in 1 second. Just before that is our live show, as we've been saying, 25th of July, Friday, lovely summer's evening. Tickets only a £5. Kelvin and Lewis on the panel, along with podcast regulars. So get your tickets from gigantic.com. Link is in the description to save you searching. And we'll have quizzes, we'll have raffle tickets, we'll hopefully have some fun, but I'm sure it'll be a lovely evening at the Trent Navigation. Right, Cole, if he does go, I think it does give us a bigger issue, to me, even than if you had Sol Morgan, because you could just plug Anderson in as a number 10, and we've seen how good he's been for the under-21s and things like that. If he were to go with Callum Hudson-Odoi only having a year in his contract and all that stuff, does it present very big problems for Forest, or do you see the recruitment team pulling some rabbit out of the hat from an overseas league most likely to solve it?
I think that's what will happen. Yeah, as I just said, I think if you're going to get well, the only way he's going to go is if you're getting big money.
Mm.
So if you've got a hole to fill, you at least will know that you have big money to do it with. And I think, I think it's probably an area they'll have been looking at anyway, in terms of adding a bit of strength in depth, because, I think it was one of the areas that we saw last season, that if you were missing Hudson-Odoi or Elanga, then, Forest were less of a threat. You look at the backups. There's talk about both Jota and Sousa moving on this summer. So we'll see where those ones go as well. But I just think that it would have been an area that they're looking to strengthen anyway. So they certainly wouldn't have been wanting to lose Anthony Elanga, and they might not yet. But if they do, I think they'll probably have some names already that they're looking at in terms of bringing in, and you see them linked with so many names and positions at the moment from clubs all over the world. I just think that over the last couple of windows, particularly, the recruitment's been excellent. You look at the players that have come in, and you look at the money that's been spent, and even those that were a little bit eyebrow raising, like the money for Elliot Anderson, for instance. Albeit obviously that was a slightly different deal, but you look at the money that Forest spent on him now, and absolutely justified. I mean, look what he's doing in the 21s. He's been outstanding for England under 21s in their tournament, and good luck to him in the final. So I think you can go through that recruitment, and you can see as well that players are being improved. Even if you go back to players that were recruited, I'm thinking Nico Williams here, who was recruited when they first got into the Premier League, again for that figure around, I think it was 17 in Nico's case, but that sort of 15 million-ish figure. Let's say between 12 and 17, a lot of Forest players have been brought into the club for that sort of money. Milenkovic would fit into that, Murillo would fit into that, Morato would fit into that. Oliver was obviously a free, and Callum was £3 million or whatever it was. So, not all of them fit into that category. Some of them are a lot less than that. But you can go through this now. You look at the 25 they paid for Morgan Gibbs-White a few years ago, and look at the benefit that's been. You look through that Forest side at the moment, that Forest starting 11, and you can see that you would give a bit of a doffed cap to the recruitment team for the way they've been able to put that side together. So I think that gives you some encouragement over what might happen over the rest of this summer. You look at the players that Forest have been linked with so far this summer, and the kind of money that's being talked about going with them. It's not silly money by Premier League standards by any stretch of the imagination. If Forest can land a few more of those deals, and as I say, that the recent history would tell you that recruitment staff are very capable of doing that, then I think that, at this stage, you kind of have to trust that, if you like. You have to sort of trust that process. You have to say, well, look, they know what they're doing. And the proof is you look at that first team now and you say, yeah, okay, they've got it right over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. In the end, obviously, when they first came in, it was a different matter in terms of those players that worked, those players that didn't. When they first got back into the Premier League, that was different, and we've spoken about that at length. But I think now you look at the last few windows and you say, yeah, do you know what? They're getting it right, and they're not spending silly money. And even when they do spend big, you look at the results they're getting on the pitch from that big investment, and it's good.
Yeah, I agree. As well as spending, it's all about how you sell as well, isn't it? I think we've generally been good at that, and there is a food chain in the Premier League, and I still don't think we're not at the top of it. I know we had a great season, but
Right.
If you sell one player a year on your terms for good money, I think that's fine. I mean, this leads into what I was going to ask next. We look around the Premier League. Bournemouth have lost Hyson and Kirkes. Brighton look like they might lose Pedro, and Brentford are probably the prime example. They've lost their manager. They've lost, or they're probably going to lose Boomo. They might lose Visser, hopefully to us. It feels like there's a bit of yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah, it feels like there's a bit of flux going on, and a few teams look they might be in very different situations. But I don't think we'll be one of them. What's your just take on what's happening in the Premier League with some of those teams I mentioned?
I think it's, if I'm honest, I think it's the bad side of the Premier League. I think it's the bad side of the PSR rules. I think it's obviously a reflection on how well some teams have done lately. And you look at those sides, you look at Brentford, Bournemouth, Brighton, Forest. And you're right, at the moment, it doesn't seem that the vultures are quite circling around Forest in the way that they perhaps are some of the other sides. But, those other teams had good seasons as well. Forest had an excellent season. Many of those teams were right up there with them and weren't expected to be. And all of those other teams had the kind of European aspirations at least up to the last 3 games of the season. And when Brentford came to the City Ground and beat Forest just after the Cup semi-final with 4 games to go, they were very much in the hunt for trying to catch Forest at that point. So there's a lot of clubs who've sort of overperformed. Forest were very much one of them. But I think what that's done is it's just kind of highlighted the quality of some of their players, and they're at the mercy of the clubs who've got the bigger spending power. And I don't really like the idea of bigger clubs coming in and picking off players from smaller clubs, but that is the sort of financial model at the moment in the Premier League. And if you have a higher spending power because you have bigger income than another team, then you are in a position to be able to go and pick those players off. So I think it's, I don't think it's great for football in general, but I suppose you could argue it was ever thus. The rules might not have been quite so strict in, going back to, even before the Premier League. But if you were a mid-table first division club, for instance, and a Liverpool came in for you in the late 70s even, then the chances are you'd probably go. I think it's kind of, there is a little bit of having to be realistic about it. But it just feels this season a little bit, this summer, that the rewards for those sides who had really good seasons last season and were punching above their weight is that, okay, if you were punching above your weight, we'll take the gloves off you. We'll take the tools away from you to be able to do that again. And we'll make sure that we'll keep you all at arm's length by basically buying the best players. And that's there's something about that doesn't really sit right with me. So I think this brings up a different point as well. It sort of leads into another point, which is the strength of the Premier League next season and how strong it's going to be, and therefore how difficult it might be for Forest to compete again in the way they did in the season that's just ended. I think that, that idea that some of those clubs who were punching above their weight might be lessened by the fact that they're losing their best players. Of course, a lot of those clubs have models, recruitment models, like we've just spoken about with Forest, and their response will be to go out and find new gems. Brighton have been brilliant at it over recent seasons. So their response will be, well, we'll go and find somebody else then, and we'll get them in for, like Forest, 10, 15 million pounds. And then they might be a 60, 70 million pound player in a couple of years' time. So there is that process that will be evolving. But to go back to the strength of the Premier League next season, I think you're going to see a lot of clubs who will be stronger. Those kind of more traditional top 6 clubs, that the likes of Forest and Bournemouth and Brentford and Brighton, to a certain extent, were upsetting last year. I think you'll see them being a lot stronger, helped by picking off players from those clubs. But I think, given the fact that those clubs will be stronger, that'll make it even more difficult for a Forest, a Brentford, a Bournemouth, a Brighton, a Fulham to try and sort of break in and compete in the way that many of them were doing last season, which is not great, because I thought last season was fantastic for the Premier League. I thought it was great for football because you just didn't know. You genuinely didn't know. Liverpool accepted, of course, they had a great season, apart from only being able to take 1 point out of 6 against Forest, of course. But apart from that, they were great. But generally, you didn't know. If Manchester City were going to Bournemouth, you didn't know what might happen. Anything could happen. Whereas previously, Manchester City just win that. So I thought it was great for the Premier League last season. I'm not sure that it's going to be the same next season, because I think those clubs who have more spending power, who are more traditionally a big six club, I think they'll all be a lot stronger, and you can almost kind of see their positions being ring-fenced a little bit by themselves, because they know that last season they were under real threat, and they're making efforts to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
So do you think last season was our one Champions League chance and we'll regret it for, whatever reason we missed out on it, which we discussed at length? Do you feel that was a one-off dream and it's gone now?
Well, I don't think you can ever go into a season thinking that. But then again, I don't think many people went into a season last year thinking it might be a thing last year. So it would be defeatist to say it could never happen again and it won't happen again. And I don't think I'm quite saying that. I think what I'm saying is it'll be more difficult to do it. And we know Nuno by now. He's not going to just be sitting on his laurels thinking, yeah, that was a really good season, let's just do that again. He's going to want improvement. He's going to want better. He's going to want more players brought in. He's going to want better. He's going to want to improve the way his team performed. Even though they performed really well, he's still going to want more. So it's not just a question of sitting still, but I do think it is going to be more difficult, because I think other clubs are going to be very much stronger next season. Now, that said, I thought, I know there's been a lot said about the way Forest fell away, and undoubtedly they did fall away over the last 7-8 games. I think their squad was too small, and I think that's why you talk about them needing depth this year, both for that and of course for their European campaign, which they hope will be more than just 2 playoff games. So I think I thought from January onwards, I looked at some of the teams who were behind Forest and thought this is going to be really difficult for Forest to stave those guys off. And in the end, of course, it was impossible for Forest to stave them off, because you knew that they weren't going to help you. You weren't going to get any help from them. It's not like a relegation zone where, the fight they were in the previous season, where you think, well, Arsenal will help us out here and they'll take points off Luton. It's not like that anymore when you're fighting at the top end. So when you saw Forest above the likes of Manchester City and Newcastle and Aston Villa, and then you saw how much strength they added in January, and given the fact that Forest didn't do much in January, you kind of felt this is going to be tough for Forest to sort of stave off those, to use that word again, behemoths. And yes, I guess you look back on it and you say it's a chance that has gone begging. I think you've got to look at it the other way as well and say 7th in the Premier League is a fantastic achievement given where they came from, and it was totally unexpected, and just enjoy the bonuses from that and try and build from there. But yeah, I completely get the idea that it was a chance that Forest let go. I just think their squad was too small. I think probably if they have any regrets, it's not about the results over the last few games of the season. It's probably the fact that they didn't strengthen too much in January. I think that's the regret, because I think if they brought 2 or 3 more players in January, and there were lots of reasons why they didn't at the time, and very valid reasons why they didn't at the time. So this is not just with hindsight. I accept their position in January as well was great. They were flying. They were avoiding injury. They had a great team spirit. They didn't, perhaps have huge amounts to spend because of PSR. They didn't want loads of players coming in and upsetting what was a very tight-knit group that had got them into a good situation. There were a lot of factors, and I understood those in January as well. I think with hindsight, they would now look at January and think, if we'd added 2 or 3 quality players, then the squad might not have tired as much as it did. The injuries might therefore not have kicked in as much as they did over the last few games. And somewhere they might have got a point or 2. And in the end, of course, that's all they needed, a point or 2 more, and they'd have been okay. So I think probably rather than the results at the end of the season, it might be January that if they look back with any regret on anything from last season, it might be that.
Yeah, I think this is another curse of PSR as well. Like, if they bought someone in January, they probably would have had to sell before June the 30th in the next 3 days and stuff like that goes into
exactly that. All of those things sort of factor in, and so that's why it's very easy to sit here now and say, oh well, if only. But actually, you've got to remember what the circumstances were at the time, and you're right. PSR is very much another one of those. Yeah.
A couple of things I wanted to mop up with Cole before we let him go. We haven't spoken about Nuno's new deal. I feel like you struck up a bit of a relationship with him. I don't know if it was how it was to start with, but it seems like you got a bond there with him now. Is he the most laid back manager that you've interviewed, or is that a dangerous misconception that I have there?
Well, I wouldn't say laid back, because I think sometimes that phrase gives a bit of an impression of really not too bothered. What I would say is calm, utterly calm in any circumstance. I mean, very occasionally we saw him riled or rattled, but not so much this season. I'm talking last season, when the pressure was on, and he was particularly angry after Everton away last season. I can't think why, for the life of me, can't think why you'd have been upset then. But for the most part, 99% of the time, just calm, and reacting the same, whether they've lost or won or played well or played badly. And I think that's a good trait in a manager. I think you've got to be level-headed. I think you've got to treat defeat and victory the same. And I think you've got to have a level head, because there's no point having the red mist coming down, because then you're not thinking straight. And I think he very much is that. He is very much a thinking man's head coach. Let's put it that way. Now, I'm sure he has his moments behind the scenes. I'm sure, if you're a player and you upset him, you're going to know about it, because I don't think you can be a head coach at the level that he's performing at without having that. You need to make people listen, and I think he does that, but he does it in his own way. And he's a pleasure to deal with. He is an absolute gentleman, and so I'm pleased he's staying. And from a football perspective, he's deserved everything he gets. Because the strides that his Forest team took last season in his first full season, as soon as he got rid of the pressure of the potential of relegation, and of course the points deduction and everything else that went with last season, then I think you've really seen the Nuno he's done it at other clubs as well. We saw him do it with Wolves. Really come to the fore in that first full season, including a pre-season. He's brought them together, and the strides, as I say, that they took, the fact they doubled their points tally, they've gone from 17th to 7th, tipped as relegation fodder by so many people this time last year, and then responding in such a way, and almost staying the course. I mean, they sort of did stay the course in terms of their run for the Champions League, because they were still in it until the final day. So they stayed the course and then just fell at the final hurdle. But that notwithstanding, a terrific season, and very much pleased as well that Evangelos Marinakis has backed him, because of course there were a lot of pundits again who were having their say about the thing that happened after the Leicester game, and expecting Nuno to leave, and so obviously this kind of takes that away, and would tell you that he's happy, with the relationship with those above him as well. So onward, and as I said earlier, he will want better. Yes, Forest was 7th last season, and yes, it's going to be tougher, I think, this season. I'm pretty sure he'll understand that as well, especially with a European campaign to contend with too. But he'll still want it. He'll still be demanding it from his players, and it'll be up to that squad to try and deliver it for him.
Two more just to touch on quickly before we go. This is putting you on the spot a bit. Will Elliot Anderson be in the World Cup squad next summer?
Well, if only I were in Thomas Tuchel's head. And if I were, yes, he would be. I don't know. I just think it's going to be tough for anybody to try and force their way in. He's doing his best, and that's all he can do is to try and persuade Thomas Tuchel that somebody like him is a better bet in the middle of midfield than somebody like Jordan Henderson. I think that's kind of the challenge that any midfielder has got at the moment. I think he's doing as much as anybody else to try and force his way in. And obviously, as I said earlier, having a great under-21s and getting a lot of rave reviews for his performances in the 21s. So if he carries on doing that and then repeats it with Forest, a little bit concerned about where he's going to be physically, because obviously, and not only him, there's a lot of players involved in football at the moment. Why on earth they're having that Club World Cup, I do not know. But that's a different argument. So there are a lot of players who are not having much of a break this summer. Elliot Anderson is one of those, and so it's going to be tough, I think, for him to restart. He'll get, I don't know how many weeks they'll give him off before he comes back to pre-season, but he'll get a bit of July off, and then he'll be back at it, and soon we're into the middle of August and going full throttle again. So not a huge break for him, and that's a little bit of a worry for me. But from his point of view, all he can keep doing once he's got the Euro 21 final out the way is when he comes back in the middle of August with Forest, is keep doing what he's doing, because he's been outstandingly good. One of so many players that you could say have been outstanding this season for Forest because they had such a good season. But certainly he's one of them in the middle of midfield, and that really, from a player's perspective, is all he can do. And I think he should be in that squad. Whether he will be, who's going to guess? If you put me on the spot and said now, do I think he will be? I think I'd probably say no, because I think Thomas Tuchel is a bit set in his ways. I think he knows what he wants. He's there for the short term, and he's made his decisions kind of already, really. And it's now just about using the time he's got. He's already said this, hasn't he? He's got so many days with that squad before the World Cup. So I'm not sure I can see him tinkering with it too much, but I hope I'm wrong.
I think I'm on the same page. Like, obviously, I think Adam Wharton's a top player. He's probably ahead of him in the pecking order. Jordan Henderson clearly is, for whatever reason. So, yeah, I think so. I think you're right about the pre-season. We did discuss that briefly with Emily the other day. I kind of hope we don't see him in Forest friendlies until even that Birmingham one in August at the start. He's not going to need.
Yeah, that's still a couple of weeks before, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So even something like that. Last one, just to finish. We're recording this Friday morning. I think by Friday evening we should know the result of Palace's appeal, or whatever the phrase is, to find out which European competition they'll be in, and in turn which competition we'll be in. I mean, it would be good news if we're in the Europa League, Colin, wouldn't it? But it would sting Palace a lot, and I'm sure some Forest fans would take it, but they'd feel I don't know, even know what the word is. Disappointed isn't the word. It's a little bit bittersweet. I don't know. Well, how do you think this one's going to play out?
I think probably they'll be all right. Is my gut feeling. It's a bit of an odd one, because they've set themselves a precedent, haven't they, UEFA, with Drogheda, the Irish side, who they've thrown out because they're owned by the same group as Silkeborg, I think it is, in Denmark, and there was no effort to change the ownership in either of the clubs, so they threw them out. So they've kind of set a precedent this season. I think probably the fact that deal is being done, or I don't know if it actually has been rubber stamped yet by the Premier League, but that John Textor has sold his stake, will probably play in their favour. I think, yes, there's an argument to say that they should have done it as Forest did. They should have got their ducks in a row ahead of the deadline at the end of April, was it? Might even have been March.
Yeah, it's March. Forest missed it, but yeah, you can still have done it. Yeah, there's a lot of minefields. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So there was the deadline which they missed, but they've done it now, and it's not even, it's not even one of those reversible things that Forest put in place with Mr. Marinakis, so that he could just resume control as and when that potential issue had gone away. This is a permanent thing. John Textor is selling his stake in Crystal Palace. So I kind of think that will probably see them in the clear. I guess you could argue that, well, we're now into this stage where, and this is the reason for the deadline for being at the end of the season or before the end of the season, before you actually know whether there's going to be a conflict or not. You could say that they've had a few weeks now where there has been that conflict, and that might have influenced the way each club was acting in the transfer market. I don't know how difficult that's going to be to prove. I think it would be impossible to prove. And I think probably they're just going to say, yeah, okay, you were late, slap on the wrist for being late, but you've done it, you've sorted it out, and you've sorted it out before the end of June, before effectively the new season starts on the 1st of July, and before the European competitions have started, even in their qualifying stages, which happens at the start of July. So they're probably, my gut feeling is they'll probably be all right, and they'll be in Europa and Forest will be in the conference.
I think so, because the other club involves Lyon, and it's an absolute mess with Lyon getting relegated as well. So speaking of that, tomorrow's podcast will be with Luke Entwistle from Get French Football News. We'll talk about Lyon's situation and how it relates to Forest around Danilo and Turner, and possibilities of a fire sale where clubs can take their best players as well. And it's not black and white around Danilo and Turner, so do check that one out. Just before we go, Carl, I know you've had a few weeks off, so your podcast has taken a hiatus. Will that will be back soon, or will it be when the season resumes?
Back soon, I think. Would probably be next week. I think. Don't absolutely hold me to it, but yeah, I think Shut Up and Show More Football will return to the airwaves probably next week. I think so. Yeah, Dave and I are both sort of back at it at full power now. So you'll be hearing from us soon.
Lovely. Good stuff. Good stuff. We shall leave it there. If you've enjoyed this, do us a favour, hit like, hit subscribe. If you're a channel member or a Patreon member, you'll get early access to stuff like this that's pre-recorded. So do consider signing up for that, or a lovely 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. As mentioned, back tomorrow with Luke about Lyon, possibly something on Botafogo, and if their players are actually going to sign on Sunday, if plans work out. And then on Monday, it'll be Fletch and one of the other lads, or two of the other lads, talking about whatever comes up in the news, because there is always something to discuss with Forest, certainly. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Colin, thank you very much.
No worries, Matt. Thanks a lot for having me.
A pleasure as always. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on. We'll have Dave Jackson on as well. Brian Laws is a lovely guy who's very helpful as well. So yeah, I'm sure we'll have the BBC Radio Nottingham lads back on at some point through the season. So yeah, have a good day, everyone. And if we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.